What was the age group studied here?
Entire range of
K to 12?
It's K to 12. It's this data is already collected annually by the Department of Education, and we got it through an open records request. So it's every student that was suspended in Rhode Island's public schools.
So schools are required to keep records of those
Yep,
suspensions?
they're already required to keep records of suspensions, and that is already required to be sent to the Department of Education annually. So we're not asking them to maintain any new information that they don't already have.
Does the research go beyond just the numbers? Did you talk to any teachers about why this was happening?
You know, we've been in conversation with teachers and students over the years as this has come up. We certainly always hear from teachers and students after this data comes out. And, you know, we've heard a number of things. We've heard teachers who have said that they are also frustrated with the suspension rates, that they know it's a problem. We've heard from administrators who feel there needs to be more training. Mostly we hear from students who feel that they are being suspended in a way that others aren't. We're certainly open to having conversations with them. We would hope that the school districts are having conversations with teachers about how best to go about minimizing these suspensions. We really just, I think, all want the same goal of keeping students in school and educating them.
Can I answer that?
Yep.
I think a piece of the answer too is that with this hyper focus on testing, we've forgotten that school's a learning environment. And it's not just an academic learning environment, it's a social learning environment. And we need to take the time and devote the energy to helping kids become whole, functional human beings. We're not born knowing the rules of the road. We have to learn those, and that has to be part of school.
And I think every teacher would agree with you, but are you asking teachers somehow to ignore bad behavior?
No. It's a bad behavior is a teachable moment.
This is exactly why we are asking school districts to take a look at their own data and to determine a plan for how best in their district to reduce this disparity. I don't think there's anybody here at the table who can walk in and say we know the answer. We are asking school districts to have that conversation. And some clearly are, as Stephanie mentioned. Others are not.
Am I close enough to that? I think also to that point, part of the issue is that we're not specifically talking about individual acts or individual behaviors. What we're talking about is their perception. And so when we have suspension rates based so heavily on things such as vague terms like disrespect, insubordination, much of that is left up to the biases of the individual, and that's where that discrimination begins to come in, because it's not just the act, it's the perception.
Is that how it's listed in the records? Disrespect, insubordination,
Yeah,
or does it get any more specific?
There are several categories under which a student's suspension can be designated. So there are categories such as fighting, there are categories such as obscene language. There's two specific categories of insubordination / disrespect and disorderly conduct, and they're specifically noted as that.
Forgive me, I haven't read your report yet, but is it in your report, is it specified?
We specify out insubordinate disrespect is removed as its own specific column.
There's a follow-up to that, Hillary, probably. You know, you mentioned that you're asking for legislation that says students should not be suspended unless they pose a serious risk, serious danger. And I thumbed through the report, so forgive me if it's in there and I missed it, but do you have numbers that say, you know, where the disparity lies, if there is a disparity between serious offenses and non-serious offenses, insubordination?
So we looked at that more specifically in our initial report from a couple of years ago, which was much longer, and we looked more clearly at what we called concrete offenses versus subjective offenses. And there remains a disparity in these concrete offenses. It is smaller than the disparity that's in subjective offenses, and I believe that's the same case this year as well.
Because there's probably less concrete offenses.
Well, exactly.
So there's a less.
Well, actually, there's only 5 subjective offenses.
Okay.
I believe there's 27 or 34, something like that. Concrete offenses. Right. So the concrete offenses are everything from weapons to drug use to, there are a lot of them. There are significantly fewer concrete issues. There are fewer students who are fighting than there are students who are, you know, having the issue. So, yeah, that's why 60% of the suspensions are these subjective offenses.
Okay, okay.
I also want to answer to his question, are we saying children should just have bad behavior and address nothing? And it's absolutely not saying that, but they're saying there's a way to handle that. And in districts like Central Falls that really became effective in the use of restorative practices, what that means is restoring the person back to being a part of the school community. So if somebody acts out, there might be a reason for that. You have that young person meet with a behavior specialist or somebody in the school environment, and schools that do this well do this all the time and find out what's at the root of that behavior. They don't say, oh, I didn't like that roll of the eyes, you're out. Why did that happen? Even with a fight, frankly, it's not all that effective to just suspend people because they come back still angry. It's a whole lot more effective to mediate that conflict and to figure out where it happened in the first time so it's actually mediated out. And so there is no conflict. Otherwise people get suspended, they come back angry, and there's still a conflict. So there are absolutely proven effective ways to address behavior that have young people improve their behavior and stay engaged in the school environment. There's never ever saying we want people to be out of control and classrooms to be out of control. That is absolutely not the case, and there are time-proven ways that statistically are shown effective at dealing with this. It's just that, frankly, most of our schools aren't using them, and that has a detriment to young people in a severe way.
Is it that they're not using them, or that they don't have the resources for it? Which I think they would argue that, you know, man, I'm already stressed to the max. Just to play devil's advocate here.
There are ways to put things in place, right? And it certainly helps if you have funding for certain adults to play that role, but there are ways to put things in place using what people have in a creative way to be more effective in what they're doing than the way they're doing it right now. And certainly training, as Hillary pointed, would go a long way, because there really isn't enough training for administrators and teaching professionals who may not be exposed to how to use these methods also.
I know someone brought up the different perception between white students and black students, that the black students are perceived as older, not deserving as much as could whoever brought that up just touch on that again?
The study that just came out in 2014 was called The Essence of Innocence, and it looks at the differential impact on, it shows that children that are African American and others of color, but more so particularly African American, are perceived of as older and more culpable or less innocent. There isn't the same benefit of the doubt and talking about, oh, it's just the child's behavior is not given to children of color, and so that. And I think we can even just look at Tamir Rice recently. He was a 12-year-old who was shot by police, and we're not getting into that, but the issue around that it was reported that he was 20 years old. And that's something that's in our sight that we see now because, you know, it made the news. But this is the type of thing, when you're having a 6-year-old and you're suspending them, or a 3-year-old, and you're saying that there's something wrong with them when they misbehave, that there's something, that there's a problem in perception there, and we have studies that show that. So we need to be aware of that and take action to train ourselves out of that bias.
Is there anything in your recommendation that turns to the parents of these students to make sure that they're aware of all the points that you pointed out of the detriment to being suspended?
I mean, it's not the parents who are suspending the child. I think that parents are well aware that if your kid talks back to you, you're not allowed to kick them out of the house. That's the kind of, you know, impact that a parent can have. We're talking now about the reaction of the school and of the teachers at the exact moment of misbehavior. There are some things that we do want parents to know. We want parents to know that they do have rights. When their child is suspended, they do have a right to appeal that suspension. That's not something that a lot of parents are aware of. And they do have the right to, you know, to reach out to community organizations and others to know about those sorts of things. Racial disparities in suspensions, as the federal government has noted, may be against the law. And if the parent feels that their student was suspended unfairly, you know, that's something that the ACLU certainly wants to hear about. That's certainly something that others want to hear about. If the school feels that a child's behavior is related to the home environment, we would hope that the school would reach out and speak with the parents. I think that's certainly some of the things that we're talking about when kids misbehave at school. A lot of times it is related to an issue at home, but sending that child home to where that issue grows is not the solution to the problem. So what we're really looking at is the teachers and the administrators who are responding at that exact moment of misbehavior to try to keep that child in school as opposed to sending them home.
Doesn't a suspension, though, in a way, force the parent to act? Because now mom or dad's inconvenienced, they can't go to work, they
Well,
gotta get a babysitter.
it doesn't, and that's
It's kind of a
actually
wake-up.
something that we are well aware of with the school to prison pipeline. Part of the reason why kids end up in the juvenile justice system is because they wind up at home unsupervised during the day. Parents can't take time off, work to stay at home with their kid who's been suspended. Instead, that kid is left at home alone and unsupervised. And what happens when kids are left home unsupervised? They get into trouble, and then you get this school to prison pipeline. Instead, I think one thing that we have heard from schools is that it would be helpful if they could get parents to come in and talk to administrators, but you can't do that by sending the kid home. There are other ways that schools can go about doing that and involving those conversations.
Can you give a simple example really quick about what Central Falls is doing, or what you mean by what corrective, restorative, pardon me, actions as far as opposed to, a suspension, or maybe kids coming back from suspension, however that works?
So I think, I gave some examples already, and there's a number of charter schools that also do this very effectively. But there is often, when something happens with a young person, the first thing is not go to the principal's office, go home. There actually might be a resource room. There might be a place for a young person to go. There's usually an adult that's extremely good at working with students. It could be a teacher, it could be someone from a community organization. They really talk to that young person to try to get to the root of how that happened, right? So that's one way it looks. Or it could be mediating, it could be mediating fights, it could be mediating those issues, but another way it looks also, it's the idea is that the young person has the ability to look at what happened and fix it themselves or see where it came from. Another example of restorative practice is when, or it's also called restorative justice, if somebody puts graffiti in a school, instead of just saying you're out, have them clean it up. Like, they fix it. They fix the issue that they caused, but there's a consistent effort to before we even start with that, we need to address the biases that people are talking about, right? So there's a bias because right away some kids doing the same actions are getting suspended and other kids aren't, right? So we got to deal with that first, but then there's also this issue of actually having practices in place that have people, that these kind of practices, there's, it doesn't always have to cost money. A lot of this is an issue of training, is to how to deal with an issue, in a different way. But the question really is, if a young person shrugged, are they gonna be treated differently? And I wanna tell you, I was in a school where I watched a young white male saying to his friend, the cops are here, you know what I did, they're coming for me, I wish I didn't snap off like that, and he's saying all this stuff, and then I look, and the cops are taking out two non-white males, right? They're taking out two males of color. And they're quiet. I don't know what those boys did, but obviously the white boy thought he did enough that they were coming for him, but they weren't coming for him. So we just want to always keep going back to, how did that happen? He knows what he did was enough to be taken out, but he wasn't the one taken out. That same moment, I watched that happen. So we do want to get back to, it's about people's perceptions, but we also want to talk about, there are things that schools can do, because we're not ever saying that students have behavior that's not acceptable, that no one addresses. We're not ever saying that. We're saying we want people to look at their biases, and we want people to address behavior in productive ways that keep young people in school. We want schools to be welcoming environments, not punitive environments. And those schools that are like that have much higher graduation rates. That's not a surprise.
Dr. Ritchie wants to add to that.
I think it's basically the same thing, just reiterating it, that there's two separate things. We're talking about a shift in culture, and one is to, recognize the bias. So when you're talking about bad behavior, who's being looked at as being bad? And then the other shift is shifting from a punitive system. And we are so practiced in being punitive and in punishing people, and we're not practiced in figuring out other ways to deal with situations, and that it is time for us to figure that out instead of constantly punishing people and punishing children that we somehow deem are not worthy. And it's over and over again, and that's what the statistics are saying. So it's a shift that we have to do. It's a shift in culture, and it's time. I mean, it's getting worse. We're talking about it, and it's getting worse. So we just have to act.
Is there a timeline that you anticipate on this legislation?
The legislation is in. It's had its hearing in both sides. It is unopposed except for one small request for changes, which we've made and are working through all the right people. So it's ready to be passed whenever the General Assembly is ready to pass it.
One last question, maybe to the doctor. Would you agree that the shift in culture might be more difficult? I mean, you're talking really about changing what sounds like what you're saying, that there's frontline bias, right, on the part of teachers who are making these decisions. How do we deal with that?
I think we talked about the training. And so
what does that mean, training? What does that mean? Someone go off to a seminar for a weekend? Is that what we're talking about?
I think
Professional development.
Ongoing professional development, because this is not going to happen overnight. I think that it's even just being as direct as addressing the fact that we have to stop thinking that we need to punish everybody. And that's a start. But it has to be continuing. It's a continual life. It took us a long time to develop these practices. It's not going to be something that we're going to be able to change. So we're going to have to repeat over and over again how to practice differently.
And this is exactly why we're asking for the legislation, which is a hard line. You can't do this, and then each district figures out what works for it, because we all recognize that what works for Providence is not going to work for Barrington and vice versa. And so we don't have the solution to it. We think that communication through all the partners involved, the community, the schools, the parents, that we can help find the solution. But we would like to see, some relief for the students who are going to be suspended now.
But, professional development for cultural competency exists. It's not like these trainings don't exist. These trainings exist. They're just not being provided.
And I think to touch on that point as well, professional development is key, training is key, all of the things that can build into how a teacher acts within a classroom is key, but also this bill in particular has had a hearing on both the House side and the Senate side, and it's our legislators' responsibility that when we are confronted with injustices like this, that we don't just sit and wait for perceptions to change. Sometimes we have to change the rules from the top, and then the perceptions change according to that. So I don't want to let our biases and perceptions within the classroom be an excuse for inaction. Our legislators still need to act. They have this bill in front of them, and they can pass it and make a change.
One really quick. I also think there's a lot of opportunity for districts to learn from one another. I think teachers and administrators in districts that are already successfully implementing these practices could be the most successful ambassadors for getting other teachers and administrators to implement similar practices. So Central Falls got a fairly major grant a few months ago to share what they've learned from their restorative justice practices, and there could be some more strategic efforts to get to connect those that are already successfully implementing these practices that we're talking about with those who are identifying in their data that they're finding overuse of suspensions and disproportionality in the way discipline is meted out. And so there could be some things that the Department of Education could do through establishing trainings, sharing best practices that I think could also really improve the situation across the state.
I'd like to just briefly tell you a story that I heard back in the course of the recent gubernatorial campaign. One of the candidates said that her first grader had come home from public school and said how a kid was crying and hitting and fighting, and he was sent home from school. And the first grader, in telling his mother about this, then said, "But he's a good boy. We should help him." I agree.
Do you have a question?
No, I think that kids that are open to the system, DCYF, those kids get a lot of advocacy. That's what I do. I mean, I'm not suggesting that every kid that acts up at school gets open to DCYF, but I think that what we could bring to the table is knowing how to have those relationships, those bridges with different people in the school system. Like in Providence, we deal a lot with the Students Affairs Office, and I feel that gives an avenue. You know, it's just one step ahead. The kid gets suspended anyways, but it gives the kid the ability to kind of voice his feelings, and then we just kind of problem solve. If we could get that before the kid gets actually kicked out of the school, would be my ideal world. But so I just think that having providers be, that I just think that's the misconnection, is that schools just don't know how to outreach what's out there to help them for these students to be successful in the schools.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming out. We appreciate it.